The care check goes to your sister now. She's the nurse, you just drive. My mother said it over the gravy boat on Father's Day, while I was cutting my father's pork chop into the small pieces he can manage since the second stroke. For 3 years, I'd been the only name on his pharmacy account, his 3 aides, his 2 AM falls. My sister had visited him 4 times, but Daphne had the RN behind her name, so the money, and the title and the credit, went to her. My father nodded along like it was settled. I set down my fork. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just decided, somewhere between the green beans and the pie, that the following Monday I was going to cancel exactly one thing, and that one cancellation would end up costing them more than any of them could pay. I'm Lucille, 34, and the woman who handed my sister a check for work she had never done had no idea that the whole machine keeping my father alive ran on one set of hands. Mine. Let me tell you how it broke. My father is Walter Hartwell. He's 69. He had his first stroke 3 years ago in the spring on a Tuesday, while he was watering the tomatoes he is no longer allowed to lift. I got the call at work. I was at my desk at the logistics firm where I manage freight routing. I'm not a nurse. I want to be clear about that. I move trucks. I read manifests. I am very good at making sure a thing arrives where it's supposed to, at the time it's supposed to, in the condition it left in. That turned out to be the only qualification the next 3 years would actually require. By the time I reached the hospital, my mother was in the waiting room telling the nurse she didn't understand any of the words. My sister was in Denver and would see what flights looked like, so I learned the words: ischemic, thrombolytic, aspiration risk. I learned which medications thinned his blood and which ones the thinned blood would punish him for. I learned to read a discharge plan the way I read a freight manifest. Every line a thing that had to happen or someone got hurt. He came home 11 days later, dragging his right foot, his right hand curled like a question he couldn't finish asking. The discharge nurse handed the folder to whoever looked like they'd take it. She handed it to me. That night, I sat at his kitchen table and built a system, a pill organizer the size of a tackle box, a laminated schedule, a binder, a phone list. I didn't know yet that I was building the thing that would hold up an entire family while they all stood around admiring how light it looked. What I didn't expect was how fast they'd forget I was holding it. Let me show you the first week, because the first week set the pattern for the 3 years. The day after he came home, the visiting nurse came to teach the family how to manage his medications. My mother sat in on it for 4 minutes, then said the schedule made her dizzy and went to lie down. Daphne was on a video call from Denver, the screen propped against a fruit bowl, and she nodded along and said clinical things. Make sure you watch his INR. And then the call dropped and she texted that her Wi-Fi was bad and could someone send her the notes later. So it was me and the visiting nurse and the tackle box. She showed me how to crush the pills he couldn't swallow and which ones you must never crush. She showed me the signs of a second stroke. She showed me how to check the corner of his mouth, how to test his grip, how to count the seconds it took him to find a word. At the end, she looked around the empty kitchen and said, "Is it just you then?" I said, "I guess it's just me." She wrote her cell number on the back of a card and said, "Call me if you need me. You're going to need me." She was right. I called her twice that first week, both times at night. Both times she walked me through it, and both times, when it was over and he was breathing steady again, the house around me was silent. My mother asleep down the hall, my sister asleep in another state. That's the thing nobody tells you about being the only one. The crisis is loud, and then it ends, and the silence after is the loudest part, because that's when you understand that no one else even heard it happen. I want to be honest about my mother, because the easy version of this story makes her a cartoon, and she isn't one. Claire Hartwell married my father at 22 and spent 45 years being taken care of by him. She has never once in her life called a pharmacy, scheduled a contractor, or read a bill all the way to the bottom. When the stroke turned her husband into a man who needed managing, she did the only thing she'd ever been taught to do with a problem that big. She found someone to hand it to. She handed it to me, and then, this is the part that took me years to understand, she resented me for being capable of catching it. Every competent thing I did was proof of something she couldn't name, so she stopped seeing the competence and started seeing only the absence of it in herself, and decided that absence was somehow my fault. The more I handled, the smaller she felt, And the smaller she felt, the more she needed to believe that what I was doing wasn't really anything. Lucille just likes to be in control. That was the family line. I'd hear it at holidays, said fondly, like a charming flaw. Lucille likes to be in control. As if I'd volunteered for the 2 a.m. shift because I enjoyed the company. And my sister Daphne. Daphne is 38. She's an RN. She works in a dermatology clinic in Denver, freezing off sunspots and selling retinol, which is a real job and a fine one. But it is not what she lets the family believe it is. To hear my mother tell it, Daphne is in medicine. Daphne is the one who understands all this. Daphne, who has not changed an adult's sheets since nursing school, who flinched the one time she saw my father's pillbox and said, "God, how do you keep all that straight?" Daphne was the family's medical authority because she had 2 letters after her name and lived far enough away that no one could check. I used to wonder why Daphne never came home. Then I realized she couldn't afford to. Not money, proximity. As long as she stayed 1,000 miles away, she got to be the expert. The moment she got close enough to actually help, someone might notice she didn't know how. Distance was the only thing protecting the story she told about herself. I figured that out about a year in, and after that I stopped expecting her on the next flight, and I stopped being disappointed, which is its own quiet kind of grief. The first time it stung in a way I couldn't put down was about 4 months in. My father had a UTI that went septic faster than I liked, and I had him at the ER at 3 in the morning, and I called my mother from the parking garage so she wouldn't hear it from someone else. She listened. Then she said, "Did you call your sister? She'll know if this is serious." I was standing under a flickering garage light holding his insurance cards and his living will in the to-go bag I keep packed in my trunk for exactly this, and my mother wanted me to call the woman who was asleep 1,000 miles away to ask if the sepsis I was already triaging was serious. I said, "I'll keep you posted, Mom." I went inside. I did the work. The infection responded to the antibiotics by morning. I sat by his bed until the sun came up, and then I drove straight to my office and routed 41 trucks across 6 states, and nobody at work knew I hadn't slept, because that's the other skill you learn, how to carry it where no one can see the strap cutting into your shoulder. That's the thing about being the reliable one. The reward for catching the thing is that everyone stops believing the thing was ever going to fall. Let me tell you about a 2 a.m. in the 2nd year. Because the 2 a.m.s are the part nobody ever sees, and they're where the whole story actually lived. It was February. The camera pinged my phone at 1:47 in the morning. Movement in his bedroom, then no movement. Then a sound I'd taught myself to recognize, which is the sound of a body finding the floor instead of the bed. I was 20 minutes away. I called him while I drove and kept him talking so I'd know he was conscious. He'd slid off the edge of the bed, reaching for the water glass I'd usually leave closer, and he was on his back on the rug, and he was cold, and he was apologizing. That's the part that breaks you. He kept apologizing to me. "I'm sorry, Lulu. I'm sorry. I didn't want to wake you." Like waking me was the crime. Like the man who'd worked double shifts my whole childhood so I could go to college had committed some sin by needing his daughter at 2 in the morning. I got him up. It takes a specific technique to lift a man who can only push with one leg, and I'd learned it from a YouTube video at midnight a year before, watched on my phone in his bathroom while he waited on the toilet for me to figure it out, both of us pretending it wasn't humiliating for either of us. I got him back into bed. I changed the sheets because they needed changing. I sat with him until he fell asleep. Then I drove home in the dark, and I was at my desk at 8, routing trucks. My mother was in the house that night. Down the hall. She slept through it. She always slept through it because her phone never pinged, because her phone was never set up to ping, because somewhere along the line I'd become the only alarm in a house with 2 people in it. The next morning at breakfast, she said, "You look tired, honey. You should take better care of yourself." I said I would. I have a gift for the small lie that keeps the peace. I'd been giving it for 2 years by then. Now multiply that night by a number I stopped counting. That's the shape of the 2nd year. And there was Christmas. I have to tell you about that Christmas because it's the one time I almost said something out loud, and what stopped me tells you everything about who I'd become. We did Christmas at my parents' house. Daphne flew in for 2 nights. At dinner with the whole extended family there, my aunt asked Daphne how my father was doing, and Daphne, who had been in the house for 30 hours and had not so much as glanced at his pill schedule, gave a 4-minute answer about his prognosis, his medications, his care regimen, using the word we throughout. We've got him on a really good protocol. We're watching his blood pressure. We. There was no we. There was me, and there was a sister performing competence to a captive audience, and there was our father nodding along because he was too tired and too kind to correct her, and there was our mother beaming at the daughter who understood all this. I opened my mouth. I had the sentence ready, and then I looked at my father, and I saw him watching me, and I saw that he knew exactly what I was about to do, and I saw something in his face that I read as please don't. Not because he wanted Daphne to have the credit, because a scene at Christmas would cost him 3 days of my mother's mood, and he was the one who'd have to live in the house with that mood, and I was the one who'd get to drive home. So I closed my mouth. I ate my ham. I let my sister say we about a job she'd never done, to protect a man from the woman he was afraid of, and that was the night I understood that my silence wasn't weakness. It was the last gift I had left to give him. I just didn't yet understand what it was costing all of us. Over those 2 years it got worse in a slow, polite way, the way these things do. Let me give you the rest of the shape, because the shape is the whole point. I became the only name. Not figuratively, literally. I was the emergency contact at the hospital, the primary on his pharmacy account, the authorized caller for his Medicare supplement, the person the aid agency texted when Rosa was sick, the name on the standing order at the medical supply company for the briefs and the wipes and the thickener for his water so he wouldn't aspirate. 3 years of small administrative surrenders, each one logical in the moment, none of them ever reversed. Why would they be? I was handling it. Each one happened the same way. A form would arrive that needed a contact. My mother would push it across the table at me without reading it. You do this stuff. A receptionist would ask who the primary caller was. My mother would point at me with her chin. Her. A nurse would ask who to call in an emergency, and there'd be a silence, and the silence would point at me. Nobody ever decided I should be the only name. It just accreted, one shrug at a time, until I looked up one day and realized I was the single point of failure for a man's entire life. And not one person had ever said thank you for it, because not one person knew it had happened. I remember the exact day I noticed. It was a Wednesday in the 2nd year. I was on hold with the Medicare supplement line, the long hold, the one with the saxophone, and the representative came back and said, "And you're the authorized contact, the daughter, Lucille?" And I said yes, and she said, "Okay, you're actually the only authorized contact on file. There's no secondary. You might want to add one, just in case." Just in case. And I sat there, on hold music, in my car in a parking lot on my lunch break, and I thought about who the secondary would even be. My mother, who couldn't navigate a phone tree. My sister, who lived in another time zone and answered emails when it suited her. There was no one. I was the primary and the secondary and the tertiary. I was the whole list. And I remember thinking, very calmly, the way you think a thing that's too big to feel. If anything happens to me, he's done. There's no backup. There's just a cliff where the backup should be. I added no secondary that day because there was no one to add. I just drove back to work and routed my trucks and carried the cliff around inside me for another year. I paid for things too, but I want to be careful here because the family later tried to make this about money, and it was never about money. I bought a shower chair. I bought the second pill organizer when the first one cracked. Small things. The expensive thing I gave was time. I gave Tuesday nights and Saturday mornings and every holiday and the standing low hum of being always on call. I gave the part of my brain that should have been free. I had stopped dating. There was a man, Eric, in the 2nd year. Kind, patient, an accountant who laughed at his own jokes. It ended on a Sunday when my father had a bad night, and I had to leave Eric's apartment at 1 a.m. for the 3rd time that month, and Eric, who never once got angry, just said quietly, "Lucille, you don't have a family. You have a job that doesn't pay you and won't let you quit." I told him he didn't understand. He said, "Maybe not." He was gone by spring. I've thought about him more than I'd like to admit. because he saw the strap on my shoulder before I did. What stayed with me wasn't that he left. It was the last thing he said at the door, no bitterness in it at all. When they finally need you to stop, they'll act like you're the one who broke it. I didn't know what he meant at the time. I thought he was being dramatic. He'd watched his own mother do it to his older sister for a decade, he told me once. The whole family leaning on the steady one until she buckled and then circling to blame her for buckling. I filed it away as somebody else's family. It would be 2 more years before I learned he'd been describing mine, and that he'd handed me, on his way out, the exact map of the thing I'd one day have to walk through. I never got to tell him he was right. Maybe he's reading this. Eric, if you are, you were right about all of it. And here is what they did with that. 8 months ago, my mother decided my father needed a real care plan, something professional, which is a thing you say when the amateur plan has been working so well for so long that you've forgotten it's a plan at all. She decided Daphne should be in charge of it, since she's the nurse. And she decided there should be money attached. The money came from my father's accounts. He has a decent pension and a paid-off house. And my mother controls those accounts now, because of course she does. Because somewhere in the first year, I had her made co-signer to keep the bills moving and never thought twice. So my mother decided that the family would pay a monthly caregiving stipend. She called it the care check, to the person coordinating Dad's care. To Daphne, in Denver, who coordinates nothing. The first time I heard the words care check was at Easter, and I thought I'd misheard. I thought surely this is for me. I am the care. I am the check. But no. The check, my mother explained, the way you explain something simple to someone slow, was for Daphne, because she's qualified and she's been doing so much from afar. Doing so much from afar. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I did for about 4 seconds at the Easter table with a green bean casserole between me and the woman who said it. And then I did what I always do. I let it go. I told myself the money didn't matter. I told myself I wasn't doing this for money, which was true, but I'd missed the real insult because I was looking at the wrong thing. The insult wasn't the money. The insult was the word qualified. After 3 years of doing every single qualified thing, I had been informed I was not qualified to be acknowledged for it. I let it go at Easter. I drove home that night and I sat in my parked car in front of my own apartment for 20 minutes, not going in, just sitting, and I told myself it was nothing, and I almost believed it. 2 months later, at Father's Day, my mother said it again with the gravy boat in her hand, and this time she added the part that finally cut all the way through. You just drive. That was the moment I stopped letting it go. But before I tell you what I did that Monday, and I need you to understand that what I did was the smallest thing, the smallest possible thing, one cancellation, I have to tell you about the napkin under my father's plate, because that's the part that still keeps me up. If this story is already sitting in your chest, do me a favor and hit that like button, and subscribe so the next person who's been the invisible one in their family can find it too. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there right now. I read every single one, and I like knowing somebody's out there in the dark with me. Okay, back to the table, back to the napkin. Father's Day. The whole family at my parents' house. My mother, my father, Daphne flown in for the weekend, Daphne's husband Greg, their 2 teenagers on their phones, and me. I'd gotten there at 9 that morning to set up my father's meds for the day and to make sure the bathroom had the grab bars Daphne wouldn't notice and the raised seat she'd never seen. I want to walk you through that morning because it's the whole 3 years in miniature. At 9, I refilled the tackle box for the week. At 9:30, I called the pharmacy because one of his prescriptions was running 2 days behind, and I wanted it expedited. I know the pharmacy by its hold music now. At 10, I met Rosa, the aide, at the door and went over his blood pressure log with her, the one I keep in the binder. At 10:30, I checked the bathroom, the grab bars, the raised seat, the non-slip mat, and I tightened the bar by the tub because it had a 0.5 millimeter of give, and a 0.5 millimeter is how a 69-year-old man with one working hand ends up on the floor. At 11, I cut up fruit and put it in reach. At 11:30, I texted the neurologist's office to confirm Tuesday's appointment. None of this was visible. That's the point. By the time the family arrived, the house simply worked, the way a house works, and no one thinks about the plumbing until it backs up. Daphne arrived at noon, in white linen, smelling like the airport. She hugged my father and said, "There he is," like he was a landmark. She did not ask me a single question about his care, which was the tell because a person actually coordinating someone's care has nothing but questions. She had none. She had a gift bag and a story about her flight. At one point, she stood in the bathroom doorway and said, "Oh, did you guys put in grab bars?" Smart. Did you guys? As if the bars had grown there, as if she didn't know I'd installed them 18 months earlier, the weekend after his first fall, on my knees with a stud finder and a level while she liked photos of brunch. At dinner, my mother made her announcement. The care check, the nurse. "You just drive." My father nodded, and under the noise of that nod, I felt my father's hand find mine under the table. He has a tremor on the left now, the good side from the medication. His hand was shaking. He pressed something into my palm, a folded paper napkin. I didn't open it at the table. I'm not built that way. I finished cutting his food. I ate 3 bites of a meal I don't remember. I waited until I was loading the dishwasher alone in the kitchen, the way I always end up alone in the kitchen, and I unfolded it. His handwriting is bad now. The right hand barely works and the left shakes, but I could read it. It said, "I know it's you. I'm sorry, I'm scared of her." Dad. I stood in my parents' kitchen with my hands in dishwater and I read those 11 words 4 times. I'm scared of her. He wasn't talking about Daphne. He was talking about my mother. My father, who handled everything for everyone his whole life until his brain bled, was sitting at a table being celebrated, and the truest thing he could say, he had to say in pencil on a napkin and pass under a plate like contraband. I folded it back up. I put it in my pocket. I finished the dishes. And I understood something I hadn't let myself understand for 3 years. I had been keeping the whole thing running on the theory that someone was in charge, that my mother, somewhere underneath, knew what I did and was simply bad at saying thank you, that my father, somewhere underneath, was directing this, that there was an adult at the top of this family who had a plan. There wasn't. There was just me holding it up while 2 people who couldn't lift a corner of it decided who got the credit. So that night, driving home, I made my plan. And here is the thing I need you to understand, because everything after this hinges on it. I did not plan revenge. I want to be very clear, because what happened looked like revenge to them, and it was the furthest thing from it. I didn't gather anything. I didn't record anything. I didn't hire anyone or sue anyone or expose anyone. I had no document to slap on a table. The only weapon I had was the one thing I'd never used in 3 years. I could stop. That was it. That was the whole plan. I could simply quietly, completely stop being the hands. But you can't stop everything at once when a man's life depends on the machine. That would punish him, not them. And I would never punish him. So I did something harder. I decided to stop being the one thing my mother had just publicly given away. I decided to stop being the coordinator. If Daphne was the nurse, if Daphne got the care check, if Daphne was in charge, then Daphne could be in charge. I would do exactly, precisely what my mother had assigned me at that table. I would just drive. Have you ever held something up for so long that everyone forgot it was heavy, including you? If you have, tell me below. I want to know what it was, and I want to know if you ever set it down. That Monday, I made 1 phone call, then another, then another. Let me take you through them because each one is a thread I was pulling, and I pulled them in the order that would hurt no one and reveal everything. I called the Home Health Aid Agency first. I'd been the authorized contact for 3 years. Rosa and the 2 backup aides were scheduled and managed through me, paid through the account my mother co-signed. The agency knew my voice better than they knew my mother's. I told the scheduler very calmly that going forward, all scheduling and authorization should run through Daphne Mercer, RN, and I gave them Daphne's number and her email, because Daphne was now the family's care coordinator. I asked them to remove me as the primary contact and put her in. The scheduler hesitated. "Are you sure? You've been our main person. Honestly, you're the most organized family contact we've got." "My sister's the nurse," I said. "She's coordinating now. It's official." That was true. My mother had announced it at dinner. I was simply making the paperwork match the speech. Then I called the pharmacy. Same thing. Daphne Mercer is now the authorized caller. Please update the account. Here's her number. The pharmacist, a man named Dev who I'd spoken to maybe 200 times, actually paused. We won't be able to discuss his prescriptions with you anymore if you're off the account. I understand, I said. My sister will be calling. She's an RN. He said slowly, All right, if that's what the family wants. If that's what the family wants, I almost laughed. The family had wanted this for 3 years without knowing the shape of what it was asking. Then the medical supply company that delivered the briefs and the thickener. Then the Medicare supplement line, where I sat on hold for 19 minutes to remove myself from a man's secondary insurance. Then the agency I'd used the one time we needed overnight respite. One by one, every account where my name had quietly become the only name, I replaced it, not with no one. With the person who had the title. I want to stress what I did not do. I did not cancel a single service. Every aid stayed scheduled. Every prescription stayed active. The thickener kept coming. The camera kept its memory card. I did not remove 1 ounce of care from my father. I removed one thing only, myself from the controls. There was one account I sat over for a long time, the fall monitor alerts. The little camera I'd rigged in his bedroom 3 years before, the one that pinged my phone if he was up moving around past midnight. My thumb hovered over the settings. Transferring those alerts to Daphne meant that if he got up at 2 a.m., the phone that lit up would be in Denver, on a nightstand, 1,000 miles from the floor he might be lying on. I almost kept that one. I want you to know I almost kept that one. But I understood even then that keeping it would have made the whole thing a lie. If I kept the alerts, I'd come, and if I came, nothing would ever change, and my father would die someday with everyone still believing his care ran itself. So I transferred the alerts too, with my hands shaking, and I told myself the same thing I'd tell a paramedic. You don't get to fix the wound until you can see how deep it goes. The last call was the hospital. I asked them to change his emergency contact and his primary point person. The clerk read it back. So if something happens, we call Daphne Mercer. I spelled it. She's the nurse. She's primary now. I gave them her cell. I hung up. It took me about 40 minutes. Total. 3 years of being the only name, undone in 40 minutes, with no anger in my voice and no lie on my lips. I just made the record say what my mother had said out loud. Then I did the part that hurt. I called my father, not my mother, my father, and I told him, gently, that Daphne was taking over coordination, exactly like Mom wanted, and that I'd still come by, and I'd still drive him to appointments because I'm the driver. He was quiet. Then he said, in his slow new way, Lulu, don't leave me with them. I almost broke. I want you to know how close I came to undoing the whole thing right there, on the phone, hearing him call me the name he's called me since I was small. I said, I'm not leaving you, Dad. I'm right here. I'll drive you anywhere. I just can't be the manager anymore. Mom gave that to Daphne, so Daphne has it now. He understood more than I gave him credit for. He said, She's going to find out it's heavy. Yes, I said, she is. That was the most honest sentence either of us had said in 3 years. For about 10 days, nothing happened. That's the part nobody tells you about a withdrawal, the silence first. The machine I'd built had momentum. Rosa still came at 9. The meds I'd preloaded in the tackle box ran out the door for a week. The deliveries were already in the pipeline. From the outside, everything looked exactly the same, which is precisely why my mother and Daphne assumed everything was exactly the same. It was the strangest 10 days of my life. For the first time in 3 years, my phone was quiet at night. I didn't trust it. I kept checking it, sure it was broken. I slept 4 full nights in a row and woke up each morning with a feeling I didn't recognize and finally identified as rest. I hated how good it felt because every hour I felt good was an hour my father was being held up by a system that was running on borrowed momentum, and momentum runs out. I came on Tuesday and drove him to his neurologist like I said I would. I sat in the waiting room with him. When the nurse called us back and asked about his current medications, I looked at my father, and then I looked at the nurse and I said, I'm just the driver today. My sister coordinates his care. Daphne Mercer, she's an RN. Has she sent over his med list? The nurse checked. We don't have an updated list. The last one's from... She squinted. 8 months ago. You'll want to call Daphne, I said pleasantly. She'll have the current one. She did not have the current one. The current one lived in a binder on my kitchen table and in my head. But it wasn't my job anymore. I'd been told that at dinner with a gravy boat. The neurologist came in and asked how the new blood pressure medication was working, the one he'd started 6 weeks ago. My father looked at me. I looked at the wall, because I knew exactly how it was working. It was making him dizzy in the mornings, which is why I'd been having Rosa hold his arm on the way to breakfast, a workaround I'd invented and written in the binder and told absolutely no one about, because telling people was never part of the job. The neurologist, with no accurate information, adjusted nothing. We drove home. My father held the door handle and watched the road, and at one point he said, "You always know his pills." I think the his was the stroke talking. I let it go. The first crack came on day 11. The pill box ran out. I had always refilled it on Sundays. The tackle box, 14 compartments, morning and evening, color-coded. For 3 years, it had never once been empty when he reached for it, because I refilled it before it could be. On the second Sunday after Father's Day, no one refilled it. Why would they? No one but me had ever known it needed refilling. No one but me knew the prescriptions were due, or which pharmacy, or that one of them required a prior authorization that I renewed every 90 days through a fax line and a hold queue, and a woman named Sandra who I'd gotten to know by first name. On Monday morning, my father reached into an empty compartment. He called me. Of course he called me. I'm in his phone as Lulu, top of the favorites. I let it ring twice. Then I answered, and I did the hardest thing I have ever done with my voice steady. I said, "Dad, call Daphne. She's coordinating now. She'll get them refilled." There was a long pause. Then, small, "I don't have her saved." I gave him the number. I made him write it down. I did not call the pharmacy. I sat in my apartment with my hands flat on the table, and I did not call the pharmacy. And that was the most violent thing I have ever done, and I didn't lift a finger. He called Daphne. I know how that call went because Daphne called me 20 minutes later, and she was already irritated. "Dad says he's out of his pills. What pharmacy do you use?" "Whatever pharmacy you've set up," I said. "You're coordinating now." "Lucille, come on, just tell me the pharmacy." "I'm not on the account anymore. They won't talk to me." "You're the authorized caller. Mom made you coordinator, remember?" "I had everything transferred to your name on Monday. Officially. You're the nurse." The silence on her end was beautiful and terrible. "You transferred? What do you mean you transferred everything to me?" "The aid agency, the pharmacy, the supply company, the supplement, the hospital. You're primary on all of it, like Mom announced. I figured you'd want it set up right." "I can't. I'm in Denver, Lucille. How am I supposed to—" "From afar," I said. "Mom says you've been doing so much from afar, I'm sure you'll figure it out." I want to tell you I felt triumphant. I didn't. I felt sick. Because somewhere on the other end of that elegant little reversal was my father, 69, holding an empty pill compartment. So here's where you predict for me, because most people guess this wrong. What do you think happened next? Did my mother call to apologize? Did Daphne fly home and step up? Or did it get worse before anyone admitted anything? Tell me your guess before I tell you. Because what actually happened in those next 2 weeks is the reason I'm telling this story at all. Here's what happened. It got worse. And then it got worse than that. And every time it got worse, it was not because I did anything. I'd stopped touching it entirely. But because the thing I'd been holding was heavier than any of them had ever let themselves know. And now they had to hold it, and they couldn't. Daphne, to her limited credit, tried for about 36 hours. She called the pharmacy from Denver and discovered that the prescription she needed was on a prior authorization that had lapsed. Because I usually renewed it 3 days before it could lapse, and I hadn't because it wasn't mine to renew. The pharmacy told her it would take 5 to 7 business days to reauthorize. She did not know about Sandra and the fax line. She did not know you could call the prescribing neurologist's office directly and beg, or that the office staff respond to the word stroke faster than to the word please, or that there's a discount card that knocks $200 off the one that insurance fights. She did not know any of the small, unwritten 3 years of learning things that made the machine run. She knew the title. She did not know the work. So my father went 3 days without one of his medications. Not the critical one. I need to be honest, the critical one he still had, but a secondary one that, when he misses it, makes his right side stiffen and his moods drop. By day 2 off it, my mother called Daphne in a panic saying Walter wouldn't get out of his chair and was talking strangely, and Daphne from Denver said it was probably nothing, and it probably was nothing, but probably is a word you can only afford when you're not the one on the floor. And there was the delivery, which is the small thing that tells you the most. Every month, the medical supply company sent a box, the briefs, the wipes, the thickener powder that keeps him from aspirating his own water. For 3 years, I'd managed that standing order, adjusting the quantities as his needs changed, catching the months they shorted us, calling when the thickener back-ordered and finding a substitute. When I transferred the account to Daphne, the next delivery simply didn't adjust, because adjusting required someone to look, and no one was looking. The thickener ran low. My mother, not knowing what it was for, not knowing you can't just give a stroke patient a plain glass of water, gave him a plain glass of water. He coughed. He coughed the specific way that means liquid went where air should go, the way I'd been quietly preventing for 3 years with a powder no one knew I was tracking. It scared her badly enough that she called Daphne, who didn't know what thickener was either, and had to look it up, and then had to figure out where it came from, which was an account she now controlled and had never once opened. Nobody died of a glass of water, but somebody could have, and the only thing that had ever stood between my father and that glass of water was a quantity adjustment on a standing order that lived in my head. That's what invisible work is. It's the glass of water that never gets poured because somebody, somewhere, is silently counting the thickener. Meanwhile, the aid agency, now reporting to a coordinator in a different time zone who didn't answer texts during her clinic hours, missed a shift. Rosa called Daphne about a scheduling conflict on a Wednesday, and Daphne didn't pick up until evening because she was at work, because she has a job, the same way I have a job, except I had somehow been doing both jobs for 3 years, and she was discovering that one was already too many. By the time Daphne called back, the backup aide wasn't booked, and Thursday afternoon there was no one in the house with my father except my mother. And the thing that happens when there's no one in the house with my father except my mother is that he tries to get to the bathroom by himself. He fell. I need to tell this part carefully because this is the part the family later tried to lay at my feet, and I have spent a lot of nights deciding how much of it is mine. He fell at about 4 in the afternoon. He was on the bathroom floor, between the toilet and the tub, with the grab bar I'd installed just out of reach because he'd gone for the towel rack instead, the way people do. The camera I'd rigged 3 years ago pinged a phone. But it didn't ping mine anymore. I'd transferred the alerts, too, to the new coordinator because that's what a coordinator gets. It pinged Daphne's phone in Denver during a patient consult, on silent, in her pocket. He was on the floor for 2 hours. My mother was home. My mother was in the house, but my mother had spent 45 years not being the person who handles things, and she didn't hear him, and even if she had, she has a bad hip and couldn't have lifted him, and she wouldn't have known to check his blood pressure or his pulse or whether the fall had set off something worse in a brain that's already bled once. She found him at 6 when she went to ask what he wanted for dinner. She screamed. She called Daphne. Daphne finally checked her phone, saw 2 hours of missed alerts and a screaming voicemail, and called me. "He fell. He's on the floor. Mom can't lift him. I'm in Denver. What do I do, Lucille? What do I do?" And here is the truth about me that I have to live with. I picked up on the first ring. The instant my father was actually on the floor, I was already in my shoes. "Is he conscious?" I said. I was out the door. "Is he talking? Don't let Mom move him. Call 911. Daphne, call 911 right now, not me, 911. Tell them prior stroke, blood thinner, fall, possible head strike. I'm 12 minutes out." I made it in 9. I want to be clear about something because I've thought about it more than I've thought about anything else in my life. The moment it became real, The moment it stopped being a lesson and became my father on a bathroom floor, I came. I will always come. The withdrawal was never from him. It was only ever from them. Every account I canceled knowing in my bones that if it ever reached him, I would break my own embargo in a heartbeat, and I did the first second it reached him. That's the difference between a withdrawal and an abandonment, and it is the whole difference, and the family never once understood it. He was okay. That word is doing a lot of work. He hadn't hit his head. The bath mat I'd put down 2 years ago took the worst of it. His hip was bruised, not broken. He was dehydrated and frightened, and he'd been on a cold tile floor for 2 hours, and when the paramedics rolled him onto the gurney, he reached for my hand, not my mother's, and said, "I knew you'd come." I rode in the ambulance. My mother followed in her car. Daphne stayed in Denver because there was nothing else for her to do from Denver, which was, I realized, the entire point of the last 3 years that no one had ever said out loud. In the ER at midnight, my mother sat across from me in the plastic chairs and she was shaking, and for the first time in 3 years, she looked at me like she actually saw me, and she said the thing she'd been building toward without knowing it. She said, "Why did you stop?" Not why did he fall, not what happened. Why did you stop? Because some part of her finally understood that the floor and the empty pillbox and the missed shift all traced back to one set of hands going still. I could have been cruel. I had earned cruel. I had 3 years of cruel saved up. Instead, I told her the truth in the flattest voice I owned, which is the voice I use when I'm closest to crying. "I didn't stop, Mom. I'm right here. I came in 9 minutes. I drove." "You know what I mean." "I do." I looked at her. "You gave my job to Daphne, so I gave Daphne my job. Everything I did is still on the schedule. The aids, the pills, the deliveries, the alerts, none of it stopped. It just stopped going through me. It goes through your coordinator now, through your nurse." Her face did something I'd never seen it do. It cracked. "Daphne's in Denver," she whispered. "I know," I said. "I've known for 3 years." This is the part I want to slow down on, because everyone expects the explosion here and there wasn't one. There was something quieter and much worse for her. She wasn't being attacked. She was being shown. And there's no defense against being shown, because I wasn't accusing her of anything. I was just describing what she'd built. "The check," she said. She wasn't even talking to me anymore. "I gave Daphne the check." "You did?" "For coordinating." "Yes." She put her face in her hands. The vinyl chair squeaked. A nurse walked by with a chart, and my mother said into her own palms, "I didn't know you did all of it." There it was. The whole tragedy in 6 words. Not malice. Worse than malice. She had handed her husband's life to me so completely that she'd been able to forget it was being handled at all. The handling had become invisible the way a floor is invisible until you're lying on one. I didn't say it's okay because it wasn't. I didn't say I forgive you because I didn't, not yet. I said the only thing that was both true and survivable. Now you know. We sat in those plastic chairs until almost 2 in the morning. At one point, she tried to defend herself, old reflex, the only one she has. I thought the agency did the scheduling. I thought the pharmacy just sent the pills. And I understood, listening to her, that she genuinely believed care was a thing that happened to a person, like weather, rather than a thing a person does, hour by hour, in the dark, with their own 2 hands. She'd believed it because believing it let her off the hook, and she'd been let off the hook for so long, she'd forgotten there was a hook at all. I didn't argue. The night had already argued for me better than I ever could. But I want to be honest because the story almost went a different way. And the way it almost went is the part I'm least proud of having survived. For about 4 days after the fall, the family tried to make it my fault. It started with Daphne. Once the terror of the ER wore off and my father was home and stable, the phone calls changed key. The first one came on a Sunday. "I've been thinking," Daphne said in a voice she'd clearly rehearsed, "and I don't understand how you could transfer all of his accounts the day after Father's Day and not tell anyone. He could have died, Lucille. He was on the floor for 2 hours. How do you live with that? And here's the thing about being the reliable one for 3 years. When someone finally hands you the guilt, your hands are already shaped to hold it. I almost took it. I sat on my couch and I felt the old weight settle right back onto the familiar groove in my shoulder, and for about a day and a half I believed her. I'd done this. I'd pulled my name off the alerts, and a man had lain on a cold floor. I didn't sleep. I drafted a text apologizing for the whole thing and offering to put everything back the way it was. Then my mother called and made the mistake that saved me. She got on the phone and she said, in the wounded queen voice she uses when she's frightened, "We've decided it's best if you put yourself back as the primary on everything. Daphne can't manage it from Denver, and frankly, Lucille, after what happened, I think you owe it to your father." I owe it to your father. And something in me, after 3 years, finally ran out. Not anger, clarity. I said, "Mom, walk me through it. If I put myself back, what changes? Tomorrow morning, who refills the box? Who renews the prior auth in 90 days? Who books the backup aide when Rosa's out? Who gets the 2 a.m. ping? Say the names out loud. Who?" Silence. "Because if the answer is me," I said, "then nothing changed. We just go back to a system that worked perfectly right up until the day all of you forgot it was running. And the next time I get the flu, or I'm in a car accident, or I simply die first, because I might, I'm 34 and I haven't slept right in 3 years, there is no second name. There has never been a second name. You almost found that out the hard way last week. Do you want to find out the hard way for real?" She didn't answer because there was no answer, because I wasn't accusing her of anything. I was just, again, describing what she'd built. "I'm not the reason he fell," I said. "I'm the reason he never fell before. Sit with the difference." I hung up, and then I did sit, for a long time, with my own version of the difference, because Daphne was right about one thing. He had been on the floor for 2 hours, and I had taken the alert off my phone, and no amount of being right about the system makes that easy to carry. I decided something then that I still hold to. I would never apologize for setting the weight down, but I would also never pretend the setting down was clean. It wasn't. Honest things rarely are. The lie had been clean. The truth had a man on a bathroom floor in it. I chose the truth anyway, with my eyes open, and that's the most adult thing I have ever done. The blame didn't hold. It couldn't, because Marion arrived 3 days later, and a professional in the room changes what a family is allowed to pretend. If you've ever had to let something break so the people around you would finally believe it was real, share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight, because I'm almost to the end, and the end is not what I thought it would be. The days after the fall rearranged everything, but not the way a courtroom rearranges things. There was no document, no reveal, no moment where I produced evidence and watched a face collapse. I had nothing to produce. The only thing that changed was that the family could finally see the size of the thing, and you can't unsee a size. Daphne flew home 2 days later. She didn't text first. She just appeared at my parents' house on a Saturday morning, and she'd lost the airport gloss, and she looked like someone who'd spent a week discovering that a title is not a skill. I met her at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd built the system 3 years before. She had a legal pad with her, and I almost laughed because I recognized that legal pad. It was the same instinct I'd had 3 years ago. When you're drowning, you make a list. She'd written maybe 9 items on it before she gave up. Pharmacy? Which aid agency? Prior auth? What is this? Camera app password? Number for Sandra? She'd heard me mention Sandra on the phone and written her name with 3 question marks. A stranger's name. A lifeline she didn't know how to reach. "I don't know how you did this," she said. She wasn't being dramatic. She said it the way you'd say it standing at the base of something very tall. "I have been trying for 9 days. 9 days, Lucille, and I'm a nurse. I went to school for this, and I cannot make this work, and you did it for 3 years while you had a full-time job, and I let Mom give me a check for it." She had the care check with her. She slid it across the table at me. It was made out to her, my mother's signature in the corner, the amount in my mother's careful hand. "I can't take this," she said. "I didn't earn it. You should—" I don't want the check, Daphne." I pushed it back. "I never wanted the check. Do you understand that? In 3 years, I never once asked for $1. The check was never the thing." "Then what was the thing?" And this is the moment I'd been waiting 3 years for without knowing it. Not the money back, not the apology. This. I wanted you to know what it weighs, I said. I wanted Mom to know what it weighs. For 3 years I carried it, and you all decided it was light because none of you ever had to pick it up. So I set it down. For 2 weeks. And you found out. Daphne started to cry, and they were real tears, not the airport kind. She said, I told everyone I was the one who understood his care. I let Mom say it. I took the check, and I didn't even know what pharmacy he used. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, the way she did when we were kids. I'm a nurse, Lucille. I'm supposed to be the one who knows, and I didn't know anything. You know how to freeze a sunspot, I said. It came out gentler than I meant it. That's a real job. It's just not this one. This one I had to learn at 3 a.m. in a parking garage, twice. She asked me then, and this is the thing that started to turn us back into sisters. She asked me to teach her, not to take it over, to understand it. We sat at that table for 3 hours, and I walked her through the binder, page by page, and for the first time in our adult lives, my sister looked at something I'd built and saw it as the work of an expert, because for the first time, she'd tried to do it herself and failed. There is no respect like the respect of someone who tried your job and couldn't. My mother stood in the doorway the whole time, not coming in, the way she stands at the edge of every hard thing. Here is what we built, the 3 of us, over the next month. And I tell you this so you don't think the story ends with everyone destroyed, because that's not what a withdrawal is for. A withdrawal isn't a bomb. It's a way of making weight visible so it can finally be shared. We hired a real care coordinator, a professional from an agency paid for out of my father's accounts. And yes, the care check stopped, and the money went where it should have gone all along, into actual care. The coordinator's name is Marion. She is 60. She's done this for 30 years. And the first time she sat at the kitchen table, she looked at my old binder and my tackle box and the laminated schedule, and she said, "Who set this up?" And when I said I did, she said, "This is better than most of what agencies hand me. You should be doing my job." And I had to leave the room because in 3 years, that was the first time a competent person had told me I was competent. Marion also said something I think about constantly. She read through 3 years of my logs, and she looked up and said, "You know, nobody can keep this up alone, right? It's not built to be one person. The fact that it didn't collapse sooner is the part that worries me." She wasn't praising me, she was diagnosing me, and she was right. Daphne does the medical liaison now. For real, from Denver. But the parts a remote nurse can actually do. She reads his labs. She calls his doctors with the right questions. She earns the 2 letters after her name for the first time, and she calls me every Sunday. And somewhere in there, we are slowly becoming sisters again instead of a hierarchy. The first Sunday she called, she asked me how I was, and I realized no one in my family had asked me that in 3 years, and I had to sit down. My mother learned to call the pharmacy. I want you to understand what that cost her. A woman who'd never called a pharmacy in 70 years. The first time, she wrote out what she was going to say on an index card. She read it to me first to make sure she had it right. She got the refill. She came back into the room holding the bag like a trophy. And I said, "Good job, Mom," the way I'd say it to my father. And she didn't even bristle because she finally knew what the job was. She does the morning meds now. She holds his arm on the dizzy mornings. She learned the workaround I'd invented and never told anyone, and she does it without being asked. And the first time I saw her do it, I had to look away. And me, I still drive. That part's true, and it always will be. I drive him to the neurologist on the second Tuesday of the month. I drive him to the cardiologist. I drive him to the diner he likes where they cut his pancakes for him without being asked, because I called ahead 3 years ago and they never forgot. I drive because driving was the one piece of all of it that was ever really about love and not about being the only one. My mother said it like an insult. You just drive, and it turned out to be the truest and best thing I do. My father is okay. The word still does a lot of work. He's stable. The new system has more hands on it now, real hands, and when he falls, he will fall again, that's the nature of it. More than one phone lights up. We tested it. I made them test it, the way you test a smoke alarm. 3 phones lit up. I cried in my car about that one, in the good way. He keeps the napkin. He showed me a few weeks ago that he'd kept it, folded in the drawer of his nightstand, the 11 shaking words. He said, "I was scared of her. I'm not anymore." And I understood he didn't mean my mother had changed into someone harmless. He meant he'd watched the whole family be forced to see what was real, and you can't be as scared of a person once everyone can see them clearly. The fear had lived in the dark, in the gap between what was happening and what everyone was allowed to say. I'd turned the lights on. Fear doesn't survive the lights. There's one more thing I learned after, and it's the thing that finally let me put the anger down, so I'll give it to you in case you need it too. A few weeks after the dust settled, I was sitting with my father at his kitchen table, the systems table, and he started talking, the slow way he talks now, about the years before his stroke. And he told me something I'd never known. He told me that for 40 years he'd been the only name too, not for a sick person, for a whole life. He'd handled every bill, every repair, every hard phone call, every decision, because my mother had been raised to believe that handling things was beneath her and somebody else's job, and he'd let her believe it because correcting it was more work than just doing it. I made her helpless, he said. I thought I was being a good husband. I made her helpless, and then I had a stroke, and there was nobody left who could handle anything. So it all fell on you. He looked at me. I did to you what I never meant to. I handed you a wife I'd trained to need carrying. I sat with that for a long time, because it reframed everything. The napkin, the fear, the 3 years. My mother wasn't a villain who'd schemed to use me. She was a person who'd been kept a child for 45 years by a man who loved her badly, and when the man broke, the child reached for the nearest adult, and that was me. None of which makes it okay. But it makes it human, and human is the thing I needed it to be. Because you can set a boundary with a human. You can't forgive a cartoon, and you can't heal next to one either. My father is teaching my mother to be an adult now, at 69, with one working hand. It's the slowest, strangest, most tender thing I've ever watched. He sits with her in the bills, and he makes her read them all the way to the bottom. She hates it. She does it. The other day, I heard him say to her, "If I go first, you can't hand this to Lucille. She's done her tour." Her tour, like I'd been to a war. I suppose, in a way, I had. The kind nobody pins a medal on. The kind where the only proof you served is that everyone else got to sleep. And there's the diner. I have to end with the diner because it's where I finally felt it. Last Tuesday I drove him there, like always, and the waitress brought his pancakes already cut, like always, and halfway through he put his fork down, the good hand, the shaking one, and he reached across and put it over mine. And he said, "I see what you did, I see what it cost, and I'm going to spend whatever I've got left making sure nobody ever makes you carry it alone again." And then he picked his fork back up and finished his pancakes, and we talked about the tomatoes he's allowed to look at but not lift, and it was, I think, the first ordinary meal I'd had with my father in 3 years. Ordinary because for once I wasn't also working. I was just his daughter eating breakfast, being seen. That's what the withdrawal bought. Not revenge, not the check. Just that. A man seeing his daughter over a plate of cut-up pancakes, finally knowing what she'd done. If you've ever had to put down something heavy to make the people you love finally feel its weight, if you've ever been the only name on the account nobody knew existed, tell me below. Not the angry version. The true version. I read everyone. And I want you to know that setting it down didn't make you the villain, no matter what they said when the floor finally showed. People ask me if I got revenge. I tell them no, and they don't believe me because the shape of it looks like revenge. The sister humbled, the mother brought low, the careful machine I'd built running on without me to prove a point. But I didn't do anything to them. That's what they could never get their hands around. I didn't take, I didn't expose, I didn't punish. I just stopped lying. For 3 years my hands had been telling a lie my mouth never said. The lie that the work was light, that it ran on its own, that anyone could do it, that I was just the driver. I stopped telling that lie. I let the truth have its full weight for 2 weeks, and the weight did the rest. The care check sits uncashed in a drawer somewhere. I think about it sometimes. My mother offered it to me, after. The way you offer a thing when you finally understand it was never the thing. I told her to put it toward Marion, toward real care, toward the actual thing it was always supposed to buy. Because here's what 3 years of holding it taught me, and it's the only wisdom I've got. The people who never feel the weight are not always cruel. Sometimes they're just standing on the part of the floor you're holding up, and you can spend your whole life keeping that floor steady so they never have to know. Or you can step back once, gently, and let them feel the give. It will frighten everyone. It frightened me. But it's the only honest thing left to do when they've started handing out checks for the work your hands are still doing. I set down my fork on Father's Day. I canceled one thing that Monday, and in the space where my name used to be the only name, my whole family finally had to learn how heavy he was to love. He was always worth it. That was never the question. The question was whether they'd ever know what it cost, and now, at last, they do.